All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first Women Speaker Series. I'm going to turn it over to Jody Garber-Simon because this was really because of her that we're here today, and that, we thank Devorah very much for being the first one. But I'm going to turn it over to
Hi, thank you guys for being here. Last winter I went to an OU Women's Conference. I think it's the first one they ever had, and started thinking about ways we could hear women's voices in our community. And this is the first idea we came up with, which is to find our local women who have something to say and hear from them. So thank you for being here. We have 6 volunteers over the next 5 months, I think, through March. So please check the schedule, and we hope we'll see you all at each one. And this is Devorah. She was our first volunteer to do this, so it's fitting that she is the first person to speak. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to say.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a little handout in a minute, but I'm going to read you something that Jacob and I, in our studying, came across this line. Jacob studies the Zohar from Rabbi Matz, from a really beautiful translation in their commentaries. And he read me this line, and I went, whoa, 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 say that again. And then he read it again, and we went, whoa. So listen to this, okay? Concerning everything that cannot be grasped, its question constitutes its answer.
One more time.
Concerning everything that cannot be grasped, okay? Like, just take a minute and think about what can't be grasped. And I have some questions on here about some things that can't be grasped. Think about God, loving God, talking to God, being close to God. Like, how do I do it? What does that mean? What am I supposed to do? But ultimately, are you ever going to completely grasp that? So then it says, its question constitutes its answer. I was like, okay, brain is rearranging a little. Because we are largely taught in our normal culture that the answer is what you must always seek, and it must be right, and there's only one of them. And if you don't get it right, you won't get a good grade on your test. Right? How many of you grew up with that? Right? Like, you have to work really hard to get a right answer, and when you're really young, that's not necessarily the way you see the world. So in a minute, I'm going to hand these out, and I want to read that to you because it typed it wrong. It said, on here what it said is concerning everything that cannot be graphed. Do you know that process where you talk something and then it types it for you? So I didn't look at it carefully. So I'm going to hand these out in a minute because we're going to go through a couple of sources. But have you ever asked a question and you just landed in a place where you didn't know? So what I have noticed is that often we get ourselves set up to be able to make sure that whatever the thing we're about to do, that we're going to do it perfect. You ever bumped up against that issue? And there's no such thing. So I'm preparing to give this talk, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to get some sources in there, and I got to make them sound really good, and I got to tell my point of view, and I got to get on my soapbox because I really like getting on my soapbox. Just saying. And I'm going to preach it. And so I'm chatting with my wonderful friend, Devorah Fleshler. She's like, Devorah, I think you should just be yourself. I'm thinking, oh my God, I spend my whole career these days telling women they should be themselves. It's like, okay, fine, right? You get your own medicine. And I was like, I wasn't even going to tell anything about my story. So it's good to have good friends. When I was growing up, I grew up in a family of Holocaust survivors who, thank God, my mother and my father both escaped into England from wealthy, my father in Holland and my mother in Germany. They were wealthy, assimilated families and escaped from Hitler into England. But I grew up with stories of the Holocaust. I remember my mother saying to me that she remembered on Kristallnacht being hidden at the neighbor's house in the room at the top of their house, and the kids in the house weren't allowed to know she was there. And she said to me, she stood in her window and she made a vow that she would never let that happen to her child. And thank God she was able to keep that. But I grew up with these stories. I didn't grow up living them. I grew up in a nice, happy family that was successful and good, and I got sent to Hebrew school. So Hebrew school led me to create a one-woman show called Is God a Man in the Sky? Because it seemed to me that according to Judaism, that God was a man in the sky with a beard and a book. Now, why? Because when did we go to synagogue on high holidays? And what do they say? You're going to be written into the book of life or the book of death. So who's doing the writing? God. So who's the most holy? These rabbis. So God must be a man in the sky with a beard and a book. In college, I said, I'm out of here. Because for some reason, we all are who we are. We all have something in us that is who we are at our core, which is our soul, which we're going to get to that a little more. There was one moment where Hebrew school got some new blood and kind of branched out from the teacher, I remember, with the number on her arm, and I remember feeling that if I misbehaved, she said, if you misbehave, it shows you don't care about my suffering. It was a challenging time to be in Hebrew school. Later on, I met her, and she was amazing. I came back to work at that same Hebrew school where I went to school, and it was like, well, is this revenge, or am I redeeming my... And when I met her then, she had written a book, and she was shining and adored. But when I was her student, she wasn't there yet. But later on, there came a group that were younger. It took us like to Camp Vermont. And instead of services, they said, go out and sit under a tree and talk to God. And I was like, okay. And I did, and I felt something. I felt I was in God's presence. I felt something. I couldn't explain it. Nobody was taught me how to connect to God. Nobody did that. Because God was a man in the sky with the beard and books. How are we supposed to talk to God? But I knew that wasn't what God was. I don't know how I knew. Nobody talked to me about it. Nobody taught me. Nobody led me through anything. But when I went to college, I was like, I'm out of here. And it's a common story. How many of you have heard of Jews who've gone over to the guru popular crowd, right? I did that. And of course, my guru was, that's right, Jewish, named Harvey. Seriously, I'm not kidding. I went to university in Olympia, Washington, and I left it after one quarter to join a commune that ran a vegetarian restaurant in Portland because they had a guru and they were chanting and meditating, and it was so awesome. My parents were completely freaked out, and eventually they got me out and sent me to England where I went rock climbing, which I loved also. And eventually I did go to university in Santa Cruz, and then came a very powerful turning point moment, because during all this time, Jewish was completely irrelevant to my life. Not God, just Judaism. Because according to me, there was no path in Judaism for someone who was spiritual. Because I never met anybody who was spiritual and Jewish. They didn't tell me that in Hebrew school. I'm telling you. Like, how many of you felt like you had a spiritual Jewish education? Not neshama. No. I'm kidding. But did anybody here feel like you got a spiritual Jewish education? Good. From your family or from a Hebrew school?
From my family.
Right. So my family was not spiritual. They were Holocaust survivors, so you were Jewish because that was important. And but that was it. So I was in college, and I was in a class for personal growth and development called co-counseling, and they would work on all different isms. So this particular evening was the anti-Semitism evening, and they knew I was Jewish, and so they said, would you mind working in front of the group? And it was a very safe, very supportive environment. I said, sure. They knew I was Jewish. I didn't do anything about it, but I didn't hide it either. It was irrelevant. And so they asked me, so I came up in front of the room, and she said, I want you to stand up and say, proudly, I'm a Jew. I couldn't do it. Until that moment, if you had asked me if I'd experienced anti-Semitism, I would have said no. But when they asked me to stand up in front of the class and say, I'm a Jew, I couldn't do it. I felt like I was being asked to call myself a swear word. And I didn't know that I felt that. That started a whole journey for me where I really I was led into going, why? Like, what was that? And it eventually led me to, for my first trip to Israel, to my father's brother, who was a Baal Tshuva when they were young and was Orthodox. And it was kind of a split because my father was completely not religious or spiritual in any way. And I went to them, and they took me he took me with him in Ra'anana to synagogue on Friday night. I don't know what he was thinking. So I get there, it's this little room, and the men are all on this side. I can't see them. I'm in a room all by myself with all these prayer books that are only in Hebrew. I was so mad. I stormed home to my aunt and I said, this is the most sexist religion I've ever seen. And she's like, he should never have taken you there. I was so mad. But every time I argued with them, I would cry. So eventually when I made it to the hotel, I felt something and I couldn't explain it. But when I left Israel, it was like a piece of me was staying in Israel when I was leaving. And it started this weird series of things. And I came back to Santa Cruz, where I was living, at the retreat center for the guru, Baba Haridas, who was a silent guru. There was going to be this rabbi called Shlomo Carlebach. I'd never heard of him, but he was a spiritual singing Jewish rabbi. So I went to the retreat center of the guru, Baba Haridas, with Shlomo Carlebach, and I met Rabbi David Zeller, Leva Shalom. And so he and his wife were dressed, I could see they were Jews. She was wearing these skirts and things, and I beeline for her, and I say, why would you, a modern American Jew woman, be Orthodox? It's the most sexist thing I've ever seen. She said, would you like to come to our house for Shabbos? And my husband teaches a class in Jewish meditation. I said, what? In what? So I went. In that moment was another turning point because I didn't know there was such a thing as Jewish meditation. It was in that moment that what I knew inside my being was God. Like that, that's the thing in that question. And what Judaism said God came together for the first time. I never had heard anyone talk about Judaism in a way that made sense to me. But of course, David Zeller had gone through the same thing, only more intensely than me. He'd gone to India and become a sadhu. And then his guru said, okay, you're all done, go home and be a Jew. His guru said, go home and be a Jewish leader, which he did. And he made songs and music, and he became my dearest friend. And the next weekend, I went to stay with a woman who he introduced me to named Jody. It was my first Shabbat where it was just women making Shabbat together. And that started my journey to try to keep Shabbat. I'll never forget my first Shabbat. I tried to keep after that all by myself in my communal household. I knew some things, like a few things. And so I lit my Shabbat candles, and then I went into the kitchen and turned on the light. Oh, you're not supposed to turn on the light. And then I opened the refrigerator and saw that my food wasn't labeled, and I wrote a note, oh, you're not supposed to write. And it dawned on me that Shabbat was all about getting off of automatic. It was also the first time I had ever bought myself flowers in my entire life. It had never occurred to me that you could buy yourself flowers. But everybody bought flowers on Shabbat, so I bought flowers for myself. And I thought, you know what? Shabbat is the day that you're good enough. And from then, I've observed Shabbat in varying levels of capacities and styles. And so what this led me to is to being, this kind of, I found out there's a label for the kind of Jew that I am, as neo-chassid. That's a thing. And what it means is that I don't wear the things, but we really love Hasidic teachings, and we love the spiritual teachings, because it speaks to the part of me that is who I am in my essence. And I have had the opportunity to find those teachings. And so many of you here have been learning with me for over the last almost 10 years, Nitivot Shalom, which is a Hasidic commentary. And what it does is it helps you to go from the words in the page to the experience in your heart and your soul and your life. So I wanted to ask some questions. So I'm going to send around a sheet. If you happen to have a writing implement with you, great. Otherwise, you could just think the answers, or you can type them into your phone or whatever. There's some simple questions that are on the back. And then there's some sources. I better keep one of these because I need one also. And then there are some sources There's nothing very hard to answer, but just so that you have an experience. All right, so I'm going to let these come around, and on the back are just a couple of personal questions, and I decided that because these questions are kind of personal, I'm not going to have people raise their hands. Instead, I'm just going to have you answer. You're going to answer yes or no, or some kind of in-between answer, like, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm thinking about it, whatever, if you have an in-between answer. All right, so the first question, this is not a hard question for this group, but I just want you to answer these questions honestly for yourself. Do you believe in God? And just write yes or no, or kind of, or I think so, or whatever. You have a middle answer, middle answer. Do you believe in God? So that's the first one. And it's good to write them down only because I want you to feel what it feels like to answer the questions. So, is this an extra or something? Oh. So you'll have to share a couple of them. Okay, we have a couple coming back to share. I'm going to ask the questions. All you have to do is yes, no, or an in-between answer if you don't have a yes or a no. Do you love God? Does God love you? Do you talk to God? Does God talk to you? Do you feel close to God? Do you have a soul? Do you hear messages from your soul? Do you know your soul story? Do you know your purpose? And do any of the questions feel hard to answer in any particular way? So just notice what you notice about your own experience of the questions. Because obviously there's no right or wrong answer to these questions, but notice if you feel like there is. So just notice what you notice about the questions, and we'll come back and we'll look at your answers, and maybe at a certain point at the end, maybe we'll share in some particular way. But do you see why I didn't make you raise your hands? Isn't it interesting to note the range of what is possible for us to feel about these questions and to notice? And when you look at these, what do you think other people feel about these? Like, what do you think your children think about these answers? What do you think your family members think about these? Like, did you always have the same answers to these, or have they changed? So just think about it a little bit, okay? All right, turn your paper over and look at source number 2. I want to talk a little bit about the soul. And what I want to do is I want to help us all to see how in the actual words of the Torah themselves there are hints to what you can experience. So the first time the soul is used is in Bereshit, and it says, Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim vayihi adam lenefesh chaya. It's the second creation of the human, and the Lord God formed man out of dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living soul. There are 2 different words for soul in this verse. Okay? Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim. This is the distinct name of soul that is not used almost anywhere else in the entire Torah. It's always nefesh. And then Adam is also a nefesh chaya, a living being. So is everything else. So are the animals, they're all nefesh chaya. So we are that. But not a single other being is given a neshama. Nowhere. Not once. It's not, and it's hardly ever even mentioned again in the whole Torah. I didn't have a chance to do a full search on it, but it's hard to find. It's not there much. So here is something that I think is such an incredibly powerful way that Hebrew teaches us something so profound, because the word, this word breathed in by Yipach, what does every single tradition have you do first? Right. Notice your breath. Every single solitary practice you will ever encounter will tell you to first focus on your breath. Why? But the Torah tells us here exactly, because your breath is the way to connect to your soul. It's the same word, right? So there's like a very profound hint in the Torah itself, in the language itself, in Hebrew itself. There is a very profound hint about how do you hear your soul. Okay, sure. So in Hebrew, the same word for breath and soul is the same. Neshama is the soul, which we have here in this verse, and neshima is breath. It's just the vowels are different, right? Because as you know, in Hebrew, there's letters and the vowels are dashes and dots. And so this different sound of a word doesn't change its letters, and the letters are exactly the same. So we are given an absolute, fundamental, concrete clue that if you want to be connected to your neshama, what do you have to do? You have to put your attention on your breath. So breath is one of the only things really that works automatically and by intention. Most of the rest of us, it's one or the other. Like my arm generally doesn't move unless I go move, right? But I can be asleep, I can be oblivious, and my breath is going, or I can hold my breath, I can breathe longer. It's very powerful. In yoga, there's an entire tradition of practice that's based on breath. It's extraordinarily powerful. There are Western traditions, too, that are entirely based on breath as a path to change your consciousness, raise your consciousness, shift your awareness, relax you, heal you. It can't be overstated, the power of breath. There are people, that's their entire work in the world is breath people. Whatever, they call them different things. So I want you to take this in, all right? Okay, so then I want you to, so I asked you something about your soul story. So soul really interests me, but so does story. And in Hebrew, the word for story is sipur. Now, we like mystical, spiritual texts and things, so we have a copy of a very old mystical text called Sefer Yetzirah in a nice, beautiful modern translation by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who is a blessing to the English world because he's given us access to a lot of things. Most of it I completely cannot understand. But there is one thing on the first page that I love so much. And it's actually the first source. And it says, and he, meaning God created his universe with 3 books. In Hebrew, the word book is sefer. With sefer, sfar, sipur, with text, number, and story. Right? Story communication. This is the same root. Sefer, Sfar, Sipur are all the same root, and so are Sefirot. Who's heard of Sefirot? Right? Those are the emanations that are supposedly brought God down the world. Some people will compare them to the chakra system. These are, they have, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, they have names, they have qualities. We use them sometimes for counting in the Sfirat HaOmer, right? Sfirah, same thing. Okay, so again, this in English, there's no connection at all between the words, text, number, and communication. None. In Hebrew, it's one word. It's the same word. Why? Why is that the same word? So what he does is he pulls that, because it said God created the world with 3 books. If God created the world with these 3 things, what does that say to us? And so Ari Kaplan pulls it out. So if you look underneath the thing, so text, right, which is also book, a sefer, right? You know the simple Hebrew word book, sefer. Sefer Bereshit, right? But that has to do with space, like world. And then in the technical thing, the form of letters, all right? And then number is sfar. That's misparim, sfirot, all that number. Year, so time, right? So you have space, you have time, and the numerical value of the letter. And then Sipur is communication. It also means a story. It's connected to your soul or your spirit. And that's the pronunciation and the names of the letters. So I'm like, oh my God, that's just the most amazing thing in the world to me. Because all of everything of time, space, and spirit is contained in Hebrew in one word, one root letter. And what it does is it gives you another hint about how to expand your consciousness and not be confined to something so contracted. We spend a lot of our time being in very contracted states of consciousness. I can only do this. I can only think that. I can only answer this. There's only one right way, and I have to do it this way. And I left Judaism because I didn't like that. And nobody told me anything else. When I was young and I was searching, there wasn't anybody to tell me that there was this vast, expanded world of higher consciousness and that I could feel something. Nobody, when I was growing up in Judaism, said, here's how you feel connected to God. There was nothing about feeling anything. There was just a lot of knowing stuff. Right? So you just have to know a lot of stuff, and you have to behave yourself. And your imagination and all that other wacky stuff, you should be quiet and listen and do what you're told. I wasn't that good at that. And so I'm still not that good at that. And that's okay. Even in my business, I tell everybody, look, I'm deep and a little wacky. If you don't like it, that's okay, because there are a lot of other people in the world that you can connect with. But honestly, it's a lot more fun to be deep and a little wacky. So, and the reason that I say deep and a little wacky is because if you think about it, deep all by itself often goes off into weird fundamentalism. Think about people who are a little too deep all the time and you have to do it my way and it's only my way. They go back into that's only my way and the right way. Wacky is like, you have to have a sense of humor. You have to be creative. You have to look at things in a new way. You have to ask a lot of questions. We like that in Judaism. So one of my other things why I say deep and a little wacky is because I am really also a passionate advocate of imagination. I wrote my undergraduate thesis a long time ago in the 80s on the importance of imagination in learning. I was in the schools with what I now call infiltrating, meaning I brought all this deep spiritual stuff in my stories. You're going to go into an imaginary world. And I realized that our schools were not supporting anybody to really follow their imagination into those worlds that lit them up, that made them filled with joy. And now I spend a lot of time helping people access something that a kind of a term I've coined called spiritual imagination. And the reason I made up that term is so that you could avoid the problems of theology and science and just trust whatever the heck comes to you. Because imagination is a little bit of a free pass. Because if it's imagination, it doesn't have to fit theology or science. Because you just made it up. And if you're not sure if the stuff you make up is true, it doesn't matter because it's your imagination. But I really believe that our souls are starving for that realm. Have you ever been in that creative flow state? Have you ever been in that state where you're just creating something in flow? Isn't that like the best thing ever? We love that state. But mostly we weren't encouraged to get into it, and we hardly ever have time for it. How many of you have ever said, I have to do this thing that I love? Have you ever noticed that? It's like, what the heck is with us about that? Like, I have to spend more, I love doing that flow writing, but do I do it? And I recently just had someone said, you should spend more time doing that. I'm like, I know. We're so used to that what has value is what's hard. Think about it. The harder it is, the more uncomfortable it makes you, and the worse you are at it, the more value it has because you have to work really hard at it. What do they make you work really hard at in school? What you're not good at. Like, what the heck? Where's the, oh, you're so good at this, forget about that. Let's focus on this. When did we have time to focus on what you love, what lights you up? So I believe that we have not been given a lot of opportunities to enter that creative realm and to understand how to gain access. So so it came to me a while back, and I should back up a little bit. Once I got into all this, when I came back from living in Israel, and I came back to America, and I was in Los Angeles, I went back to that same synagogue, and I taught there. And I taught meditation and things like that. I would make everybody close their eyes and do all this stuff. And that's what I'm going to make you do too. And the reason I do it is because I really believe we all deserve to have access to that super cool, awesomely fun place called imagination. And I call it spiritual imagination because I also think that's where you can actually start to feel God's presence, not just as a theory. That you can feel your own inner being, your own soul. Because most of us are like, well, how do I know if I'm really hearing God? How do I know if it's really my soul? How do I know if maybe I'm just making it up? Yes, you are just making it up. That's what you're supposed to do. That's just making it up. For you, if it resonates and lights you up, that's it. You're not prophets that are preaching what the Jewish people should do. You're trying to find your own self and your own direction. So a lot of people are scared to trust that place because, well, I'm not a prophet, so how can I hear God? No, you're not a prophet. Sorry. I don't think so. And what you're doing is you're trying to get a sense of your own inner being and your own joy. Because if joy is an inside job, which I think it is, isn't it worth having tools to go in and tap into an inner joy that's never, ever dimmed, no matter what your outer circumstances are? But in order to be able to do that, you have to do that. Like, it doesn't happen on automatic. And if you don't have any practice in your life that gives you access to that inner realm, it's hard to get there. And it's helpful if you have some kind of regularish practice, so when all hell breaks loose, and all hell is always breaking loose, that you have some practice to shift out of that place. Okay, and so I think we're going to go, I'm going to go, there are some other sources that I gave for you also about the being close to God. When I studied Hasidus, and when you look in the Torah, they say, and I ask you, what's your purpose? Forget your purpose. The purpose is to be close to God. I was like, that's it? Like that Netivot Shalom, the Hasidic commentator said, the purpose of all of Torah mitzvot is to be close to God. Seriously? Nobody told me that. The purpose is to be good, to do good, to help people, to get it right, to keep the commandments, to do what I'm told. Yes, so you can be close to God. It's supposed to be a love relationship. I want to read you one thing, and then we'll switch modes. Because for many years I've talked about this concept of loving God. Because just think if you have a hard time saying, I love God. Because it's a weird thing, because what's the prayer we say more than any other that everyone knows? And what's the first thing after Shema that you're told to do? You're supposed to love God. Well, how the heck are you supposed to tell somebody to love God? And what does that even mean? And how many people let themselves actually feel that you love God? I had a whole thing in Israel about this, where, and does God love you? And it says, Ahava rabba ahavtanu, with a great love I have loved you. Our relationship with God is a love relationship. God doesn't need humans for any particular reason. God is completely unified and whole, but God wanted somebody to love. God loves us, and you are supposed to love God. But doesn't that seem like, that must be those other guys? So, on the command, this is from Samson Raphael Hirsch. It's number 5 on the back. That means to seek the nearness of God, right? That's the dveikut, right? The closeness to God, by surrendering all your heart, all your soul, and all your means to this end. All your thoughts and emotions, all your wishes, aspirations, and all the things you possess are to be regarded by you only as a means for winning nearness to God. They are of value to you only insofar as they can serve to bring God closer to you. You've got to be kidding. Seriously? I don't know about you, but I never do that. Mostly, hardly ever anyway. Like, it's not like, no one taught me how to be close to God, and how all my stuff and all my actions and all my things make me closer to God. And what does that even mean to be close to God. Seriously, did anybody ever teach us this? So that's okay, because that goes back to this: concerning everything that cannot be grasped, its question constitutes its answer. This should be the comfort of our souls. You're never going to know the answer to how to be close to God or how to love God. There's no such thing as doing it right. It's the yearning that is it. That's it. Just the yearning that I want to love God. I want to be close to God. That's it. And then just noticing God more often. Just raising your awareness, pausing. One of the things I often teach people is what I call pause, notice, and choose, or pause, notice, and shift. Because if we can't pause and step back and notice, it's almost impossible to shift your consciousness out of automatic and to feel something new, to shift your energy, to choose a different choice. But we're supposed to choose. That's the big thing we have, is freedom of choice. So that quality of being able to pause in a moment and just stop, just pause and say, give yourself, and if I just feel grumpy and nothing is occurring, you know that time when you're just in like, nothing is actually bad is happening to you? So sometimes I'll go, I just stop. What's bothering me? I just stop for a second. And often I can shift. And Jacob taught me one time, it's actually an exercise in two directions, something called the inner smile. And sometimes I will literally just close my eyes and literally physically smile till I feel that smile all the way in my body, until it kind of cracks me up because it's sort of silly, and it just shifts my energy. There are a lot of tools for shifting your energy if you're in a grumped out state, because most of you have done a lot of work on yourself already. You wouldn't be here in Kesser bothering to listen to me if you hadn't worked on yourself a lot. So you get to shift to a higher level if you just put your attention on it. So what I'd like to do just before we finish up is give you a little bit of an example of a process that I created that kind of intersects the imaginative and the spiritual. So if you're game, put everything down and close your eyes and just begin to notice your breath. So just begin to notice your breath coming in and out. And really allow yourself to feel that shift to stillness. And feel a sense of breathing bigger than your physical self. And then allow your awareness to shift to that flow from above. And feel your connection to God, the source of the universe. Feel that connection to God, whatever that is for you. And feel and imagine that there is a flow of light from above. You can even think about this as the light God created on the first day of creation that's not physical light. And feel that light coming down to the top of your head, filling your whole body, your whole being with light, love, healing, blessing, guidance, clarity, going down through your feet into the earth, grounding you in the earth. And then breathe up that solid, rooted, comforting energy of the earth into the center of your being. And be aware of being in that state of connected flow. Just take a moment to feel just this step. There are 5 steps we're going to do, but feel just this first step. Notice and remark on this stopping and feeling still, and pay attention. Take just a moment and reflect on your days. How often do you enter this state of intentional stillness that's not when you're going to sleep? Just notice if you give yourself any moments like this. And take a moment and think, where could you put it? Just notice. And feel that stillness. There's an acronym for this process I created. It's the acronym STATE, and this is first step is stop and breathe. Now, the second step is a T, is the think about it. So take a moment and just think about yourself. Just think about your gifts. Take a moment and think, what gifts that you have that you are just so grateful for. This is just that moment to kind of focus on the positive. What do you love to do? What are you good at? What brings you joy? What nourishes your soul? And then because I spoke of spiritual imagination, I just want to give you a little taste of what I mean by that. So I want you to imagine, this is where you get to use your imagination. I want you to imagine that you're lifting yourself, your awareness, up and above your body. And that I want you to imagine like a portal, like an opening, and that you're going to let your consciousness, your awareness, you can imagine hovering, but you're going to go up and through this portal into the realm of spiritual imagination. The realm of spiritual imagination is always somewhere that is very beautiful to you. Somewhere in nature, a beautiful space, somewhere very, very beautiful and comforting, healing, safe. Spiritual imagination is a place that you just imagine. Make up anything. If you don't see anything, just make something up. This is a practice of just practicing the joy of imagination. You know, people who make up stories can go into whole worlds and imagine whole worlds being created, and you can envision them. But for now, just be somewhere very beautiful. Notice, what do you see? What do you hear? What's it feel like? And now, I want you to imagine that you are going to be able to talk to a higher guide of some sort. It can be your soul, your higher self, it can be an angel, it can be a made-up character, it could be an animal. This is where the intersection of imagination and spiritual come together, meaning don't try to do it right or true, just make up something. But whoever comes to you is going to be good and wise and loves you. So to see what shows up, notice what you notice, and if there's nobody, make up an animal or make up a being of light. Make up something. So someone is coming who is going to give you a blessing, and you get to ask a question. And the next two steps in this process are always ask and trust. And in this process, to receive information from this realm, you always have to ask and trust the first thing you get, no matter what it is, even if it doesn't make sense. So ask for a blessing and trust whatever happens. Just ask for a blessing and trust whatever you get. And let yourself receive it. Because in Judaism we never ask for blessing just for ourselves, I want to just send a blessing to Aviel for healing because we know she needs it right now. And then I want you to take a moment and send a blessing, healing, whatever blessing you need to anyone who needs it. Just take a moment and do that. And then what I want you to ask, and I often do this question without the spiritual imagination part, but ask, what is an image or a metaphor for who I am and what I do in the world? What is an image or a metaphor that will help me or guide me? And trust the first thing that pops into your mind. What's an image or a metaphor for my gifts, or to guide me, or that will help nourish me right now? An image or a metaphor that's just right for me in this moment. And just trust the first thing you get, whatever it is. And the last step is always explain, interpret. How is this like me? How am I like this? What does it seem to mean? And again, you can ask and trust what you get. And if you hit any, I don't know, it's not working, I don't see anything, don't worry about it. Just make stuff up. And if you can't make up anything, just be. Feel that you are being blessed in this moment. You are feeling light. And take a moment and feel that this is part of being connected to God's presence in your life, whatever that means for you. That you are loved and that you have closeness to God and that you have the ability to feel guided and loved and supported. And that you can also come into this realm of imagination for the joy of it. And know that always in this realm, which you can call connecting to your unconscious, there's a lot of names for this realm. But the key, no matter what, is always to start with breathing into stillness and then ask and trust the first thing you get. Always that will help you get content from this realm. And I often say to people, what you get is true. Sometimes it takes a little work to unpack and understand the message. But breathe in what you get and trust it as much as you can. And then begin to breathe yourself back down, so to speak, through that portal, back down into your body, back down into this moment. Take a couple of deep breaths. And then when you're ready, bring yourself back. And then come on back. What I'd like to do, if you're gung-ho, let me ask a question. If we go till about 8, 9, 10, are you guys mostly good to go? Okay, what I'd like you to do is just turn to somebody that you know, that you feel comfortable with, that you're maybe here with, and just share something you got from the process. Just take turns and share something you got. You might not want to share every single thing, but share something that you got. You can be in groups of 3 or 2, either way, but share something that you got from the process, what it was like for you, something that you got from it. Pause for a second. Validating the things you get in this realm. If you write it down and you think about it instead of just forget about it. I do this for some women who work with me all year, and I'm like, write this down. Because we can easily go, okay, on to the next thing. My life is busy and la la la. And part of it is to kind of put a little bit more of our lives to attending to this other realm. It's a spiritual realm, it's a creative realm, it's imaginal, it's joyous to humans, it's like food for our souls. And I feel like a lot of our world, we're starving for this soul nourishment. And we forget to say how soul nourishing imagination is. It's really, I mean, look, everything has its flip side, right? So, but there's a lot of imagination that's very beautiful, and that's why I combine spiritual imagination together, because I feel like it says something to us about what's possible that we're generally just not taught. Like, we have a lot of imagination that's not spiritual, and we have a lot of spiritual that's not imaginative. And things are in boxed compartments. And so I really love to encourage you to kind of expand yourself out of the boxes. And so I'm going to give you a couple of just tips for entering this realm, giving yourself permission. So one of the things that's helpful to some people is to just close your eyes, kind of do at least that first step, even if you don't do the others, and then just write whatever comes to you. I'm sure almost everyone here has probably done that sometime or other, but it's a great way to let that imaginative, spiritual, higher kind of consciousness part of you start to express itself for you. And honestly, it's sometimes I'll go back and go, wow, like, you know, and I forget which rabbi it was, says you can only print the stuff I don't remember saying. So there is something to be said for letting yourself have more of that flow, that creative flow, and giving yourself some time in your day to do something that's just really that spiritual connected place. And so I was just looking to see if there was one other thing I wrote down here for you. In our study group, we're now reading Derech Hashem, and I'll be happy to know I actually pulled a quote from Derech Hashem for you, and it's number 10, and it says, it says, every state in which an individual exists, whether it be one of darkness or enlightenment, is the result of either the presence or absence of God's light. So wouldn't we like to feel more of God's light in our lives? The thing is, if you're oblivious, you don't notice. If you just go on automatic, Shabbat is designed to get us off of automatic. And a ton of things in our Jewish life are designed to get us off of automatic and to feel something. But you can turn those things into automatic too, if you're not careful. It's on the other side. Now, when anything is illuminated by God's presence, its purity and perfection are increased according to the degree of this illumination. And I love that word illuminated. I say that I have my program is called the In-Story Way. It said the In-Story Way to create and live an illuminated life. Like what? Wouldn't we want to feel more illuminated, and then that shines out more light in the world? So I was like, oh, look, he's saying it. The opposite is true when his light is concealed. God does not withhold his good, and therefore when a person draws close to God, he is continuously enlightened by him. It is only when an individual does not bring himself close to God that he is deprived of his light. The deprivation, however, is due to the recipient and not to God. It's like God's light is always there. It's always shining on us. It's always available, and so is your soul. I believe your soul is light. It's always good. I like to say it's kind of like a diamond that comes up and it's not polished. It gets schmutz on it. You know, life puts schmutz on your soul. People say nasty things, bad stuff happens. But if you work on it, you can clean that schmutz off. And you can also get past it and feel that you have inside you a light that is never extinguished. We read it in the Nitivot Shalom, the Hasidic commentator said, everyone has inside of you like a sun. It's always there. When the clouds cover up the sun, is it gone? When it's night, is the sun gone? It's never gone. That light that is your soul, it is never, ever extinguished, ever. Nothing can extinguish the light of your soul or break it or ruin it or hurt it or darken it. It only gets covered up, and you can always uncover it. That opportunity is never gone, ever. It's never gone from you. And there's always more, right? Part of it is the growth and is the yearning for that closeness to God. And I think that's what we're being told, is that yearning to be close to God allows us to just pause. And sometimes, how do you feel close to God? You see the beautiful world God created. One of the most simple ways most of us feel close to God is you see a beautiful sunset or an ocean or a tree or a new baby. You see things that are created and you feel beauty. And you're like, right? So give yourself a chance to feel things. Because it's easy to go through life on automatic rush. Rush, 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 rush. And we have Shabbat. And most of us have had that moment when you light your candles and you go, it's Shabbos. Wow, what a gift. We have such unbelievable things inside of our Jewish tradition to give us access to this realm of closeness to God, of spiritual connection, of spiritual feeling, of expansion, of soul nourishing, food for the soul. So I encourage you to eat heartily of the food for your soul, to give yourself time to feel joy, to feel imagination, to feel connected to your soul. And what the heck, it's fun. You'll feel better. Thank you, everybody. Question? All right, we can have a couple of questions. Susanna?
Repeat some of the things that the acronym states.
Oh, yeah. So stop and breathe is the S. And that you can do that one all by itself as a whole practice, right? And that leads you into the state of connected flow. The second step is think about it. And you can use this, once you're in that connected flow state, you can use the think about it step to work on anything you want. The next step, and you don't have to do the spiritual imagination part in this process. You can go directly from the think about it to ask and trust. And ask and trust always go together. You always ask and trust the first thing you get. I didn't lead you through asking for a story, but a lot of the people I work with who are writing down stories and like have so much to write and I don't know where to start, I do this process with them and then they ask for a story, and whatever story, the first thing in their mind, we go through it and that's what they write. So you can ask for stories. If you're trying to create something, you can use this process. Get into that state and then ask, what's the story for the moment? And then you ask, what's an image or a metaphor, or what's an idea? You can ask whatever you want to ask, and then trust the first thing you get is probably the most key thing that you have to do, because it goes around your try harder mind and your resistance and allows your subconscious to give you content that you can't get any other way. You cannot get this content by trying harder to think about it. So if you're ever stuck in your try harder mind, do something of this nature. And then the last is explain, interpret. What does it mean? And this is where sometimes it takes some people a little time, because you might get an image and you don't know what it means. And so you can get better at it. Like, that's one of my gifts. So I can, anytime anyone gets an image or metaphor, I can always tell them, I will come to me exactly what they need to hear about it. And you can just trust, again, if you don't know what it means, ask and trust. Like, do that inner work and you will. The more you do it, the better you get at it and the more you trust it, just like anything else. And you can find if you go to, my website is just my name, Devorah Spillman, and there's something you guys will all like. On my website is a webinar I did, a teaching I did called How to Get Out of the Goo. And it has a couple of guided processes. And it shows the 3 steps of all creative endeavor. And I'll just give you the gist because it has to do with how God created the world. But if you look at the butterfly, it starts as a caterpillar. In its chrysalis, it turns into goo. Nobody likes to be in the goo. It does not feel good, but you absolutely 100% cannot become a caterpillar if you do not go through the goo. I mean a butterfly. Butterfly. You can stay the caterpillar forever, and that's fine. Like, that's some people's role, but if you are meant to be a butterfly, you will have to go through the goo. All creative endeavor goes through these 3 steps, which is vision, chaos, manifestation, and I'll show you how I know that. How did God create the world? God said, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. God said, in the beginning is the heavens and the earth. That's vision. What's the first thing that happens? V'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu. Chaos. And then God says, let there be light. So if God has to go through this 3-step process, you think you don't have to? All creative endeavor will go through vision, resistance, chaos, goo, no matter what, until you go to manifestation, to creating something. And if you know that, when you go land in the goo, now the people I work with, they say, oh, I'm in the goo, what do I need to do? That's it. If you're in the goo, you say, oh, I'm in the goo, what do I need to do? And the only thing you need to do when you're in the goo is something. The one thing you can't do when you're in the goo, if you ever want to get out, is beat yourself up for being in it, which is what we usually do. Oh, crap, what's wrong with me? I'm such a failure. I always ruin this. I'm never going to be able to do it. I'm such a blah, blah, blah. If you don't do that, if you can go, oh, I'm in the goo, what do I need to do? Maybe you need to go on a run. Maybe you need to read a book. Maybe you need to take a nap. Maybe you need to sing. Maybe you need to dance. Maybe you need to write. You just have to do something to shift out of the goo. All creative endeavor, no matter what, goes through these 3 steps. And if you want to read a great book on it, read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Really good book on the creative process. And he calls it resistance, which it is, but I like calling it the goo. And seeing how God made the world. Oh, of soul story. So if you think about it, your soul story is that inner part of you that is unique to you. When you go in and what you love to say, your soul story is a combination of your unique inner being and what you say in the world. Right? Because if you think about it, and here, one of the ways to see that answer, we didn't do this, is often I have people go back and I say, I do my state process, and then I say, in the ask, what is a story from my childhood just right for this moment? And often the story from your childhood will show you how you've always been. If you look back at what you've always been good at or always loved, it's often your story of how you approach everything. Like Anne and I would have a very different soul story, because Anne, your stories, you know how to see the order of things and structure, and you'll probably look and see you've always known how to do that. It's always been a part of how you are, or some version of that. And often your soul story is something about just who you've always been. But one of the things I've noticed, sorry, this isn't the one sentence definition, but one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of the women I've interviewed who are very creative and successful now have a story of being like that when they were kids, shutting it down to survive, feeling like they were living a life that was going to kill them basically, and learning how to open back up to who they really are. Your soul story is what gives you joy. That's probably the one sentence definition. Your soul story is the thing you do that lights you up. And it might not be the thing that you were taught to do or told was the right thing to do or that makes you money, but your soul story is what you do that makes a difference in the world that also lights you up. And it might not make a difference like in the whole world, but it's what you do that lights you up and gives you joy. So that's what you should do. You should do it. All right, thanks everybody. Good questions.
Thank you so much, Devorah.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here. So Devorah led me through my first ever guided practice back 3 years ago.
She's been my first year-long program. Jody
and
was in
I
that.
highly recommend her. Yeah, it's really, really transformative stuff. So thank you so much again for being here. Thank you, Jody Garber-Simon. Sarah Levine's not here, but